Good day to you people of the internet. So I'm really excited. I recently got a fantastic deal on an AMD Fury X graphics card. I'm a big fan of AMD, have been for a long time. And the Radeon Fury X is just kind of a legendary card to me. It's the first graphics card to use HBM, or high bandwidth memory. If you're not familiar with that, traditional graphics cards have a GPU, and then they have memory modules, usually DDR5, stacked around the GPU. And those chips, give data on demand. Well, with HBM, the physical die that the GPU chip is on has the HBM RAM stacked physically next to it on the die. So it gives you a really small footprint while giving you insanely high bandwidth between that memory and the die itself. And I can show you that a little better when we have this card tear it apart later. Anyways, the reason I got it so cheap, the catch you could say, is that the all-in-one cooler is starting to go bad. The pump is grinding. So the story the guy I bought it from told me is that he hasn't had this computer on in a little over a year. It's been sitting in the closet. He got a call from some buddies. Hey, let's game online. He pulled it out and heard a grinding noise. So I'm not sure what it is with all-in-one coolers. I am not saying that they're bad. I know plenty of people who've had fantastic experiences with them, but a few people that I know who have had these at some point or other, the coolant system seems to evaporate some of its coolant. And if this guy, for example, had it sitting on its side in the closet in the back for the last year and a half, it's not unreasonable to think that if there was evaporation, that bubbles could have traveled up the line and nested themselves into that block, and maybe dried out the bearings or whatever, so when he turned it on there wasn't proper lubricant and it killed itself. Or that's the theory I am going with anyways. So there's not a lot of parts that I could source to fix this thing, and to be completely honest with you, this all-in-one cooling solution's kind of ugly anyways. So the next best option is going to be a full PCB water block. And I decided to go with an Aqua Computer branded water block. This is the Cryo Graphics line, and it's going to look great. It's a very attractive water block, and as you can see, I've kind of put a lot of effort into this hard piped custom loop I've got going here. So adding this into the loop is going to be a fun project. But some of you out there may be asking, like, hey, the Fury X came out in the middle of 2015. It's 2018 now. Why are you putting this much effort into this old of a card? Well, to be honest with you, the Fury X is still the best card in AMD's lineup, sadly. Other than the new Vega line of graphics cards are just insanely expensive and still kind of hard to come by. The whole crypto craze has people buying up these high-end graphics cards, just driving prices through the roof. So again, I got this for a great deal, and it's still the best card I can get my hands on. So the next step is we're going to tear down this card. We're going to get the block installed. I have an XS PC backplate we're going to put on, and then I'm going to show you guys how I Sis Prep a block before adding it to a cooling loop. So let's stop talking about it, get into the lab, and start tearing the Fury apart. Okay, so first things first, we're going to have to take the screws out of the front PCI plate. Looks like we've got 6 here, 6 Phillips style screws. Next, let's go ahead and remove the rest of the Phillips screws from the bottom of the card. Should be able to pull this back plate off now. Very nice. And now we'll proceed with removing the rest of the Phillips screws. With all of the screws removed, you should be able to gently start to pull the card out of the housing. Now the first wire you're going to want to unplug is this little power wire right here that powers the Radeon logo. Next, you can flip this card the other direction. and unplug the rest of the electronics for the pump and fan. There we go. And with the card completely disconnected from the old block, we can move the old block out of the way. Alright, we got the card down to just the PCB. So let's go ahead and pull up some of these heat transfer strips here. We want to be very careful here. I know I didn't show it or talk about it in the video previously, but always make sure to discharge any static by touching something grounded. You could also wear a wrist strap, but I normally don't go that far. Alright, looks like we got a little residue here of the old pads, but I don't want to use metal to scratch it off, so we'll use the plastic of a pen. Alright, next we're going to want to clean all the old paste off. Now I'm not sure what kind of paste they use, but I've got some clean lint-free automotive rags here, and we're going to slowly start to work it off. Alright, it's still kind of pliable, so it hasn't been dried out too bad. That's good. Now, be very careful. You are actually touching the physical die of the card. This isn't like a CPU where there's a heat spreader that's kind of placed on top of the die. This is the physical die. So if you scratch this in any way, you're damaging the GPU on your card. So you can see I'm not putting a lot of pressure on here. We're just slowly trying to work the old paste out of the cracks. Now you can start to see that there's the die of the GPU, and then what are these squares next to the die? Well, like I had previously mentioned on older cards, now this is a 7950, an older AMD 7950, there would be the GPU and then memory modules all the way around. Where with HBM cards, those memory modules are right here on the die itself. So let's go ahead and finish cleaning this off. Now again, I don't want to scratch the die, but I want to try to get all of the old grease out. So I'm just going to try to encourage whatever's left with a thin piece of zip tie here. And that should let me get in to the crevices without risking any damage. Alright, that doesn't look too bad. We'll do a little bit of detail work here in a second. But I've kind of noticed, if you can almost pick it up on the camera there, it does seem like there may be some residue. So it does look like at some point, somehow, that cooler did leak. Now I have tested this card. I've run it in my system specifically and made sure it turned on. and did hear the pump grind. So I know that there's a problem there, and the idle temps were a little warm, which I attributed to the bad pump. So I don't think we're going to have any problems, so we're going to keep moving forward or cleaning this. So again, we're physically on the die here, and we want to make sure we clean off all the residue, the little water stuff around here, the die itself. So I have some 90+% proof rubbing alcohol here that will just spritz on to help clean everything off. You want to get in there and make sure any of that residue from the all-in-one cooler is gone. I'll just dab it off the parts here. We want to make sure that we clean off the VRMs because we're going to be putting some heat transfer pads back on there. Now again, be ultra careful of all the little components on here. You don't want to knock anything off. Okay. It sure looks like we've got that die nice and clean. So the next step is going to be replacing the thermal transfer pads on the VRM. So the pads that had come with this Aqua computer block are sealed with a little layer of plastic. So we'll peel the backing layer off and lay it on this row next to the chokes. And then we will work placing the next one. And then the last one. Just as shown in the paperwork here. Now there's still another layer of plastic we'll have to remove from these before we place the water block on, but we're going to leave that on now just so it's protected. Now time for applying paste to the die itself. I've chosen to go with Arctic Silver 5. Some people call it old and outdated, but I've been repairing computers a long time and have stuck by Arctic Silver for a lot of years. It is non-electrically conductive, so it will be safe to use on a GPU die just as well as it is safe on a lidded die like this Xeon here. So when people place thermal compound on a CPU, the kind of typical thing to do now is just spread a small line across, and as the heatsink clamps on, it spreads that paste. Well, there are a lot of electrical connectors here. Now this is non-conductive, but I am not going to push my luck and have this stuff squirt all over these chips. So I'm going to put just a tiny bit down on each one and kind of work it into the die. Okay, so we're going to start by putting just a small pea-sized dab on to our main block, or die I should say. Okay, that might even be too much already. Alright, and we're slowly going to work out a small layer. Now a lot of people say don't manually spread it around, to just do a line method. That doing this way can introduce air bubbles into the paste. However, when you put your block back on, it's going to squeeze out any air bubbles that you may have trapped in there. And this way ensures that I am not squeezing any unnecessary paste across the card and onto the other electrical components. Back when the first AMD gigahertz chip came out, there was no lid on it. It was a straight die, very similar to this. And the joke in the shop was one of our technicians didn't put a heatsink on right, and he let the smoke out. as in that's what made the CPU run. Anyways, this was the method that I had been using all the way back then for placing heat paste, and it has seemed to work on raw dies then as well. We're going to add just ever so much more to the HBM here. All right, let's take a look. That seems to be pretty good coverage here. What is this? Have to clean that up. All right, we should now be able to pull off the last layer of plastic from these thermal pads. All right, there we go. We're now ready to place the block on the card. Let's give one final inspection. Everything looks relatively clean. Those fingers do look a little dirty. If anybody has watched any of my Nintendo restoration videos, I use a white eraser to clean up these fingers. Now we want to be careful not to get any of this hubbub in the paste. Matter of fact, I probably shouldn't even be doing this now. We'll come back to that on the other side, but it does make a huge difference. All right, let's move on to the block. Okay, so this is where things are going to start getting a little tricky. I have the CryoGraphics water block that will sit on the card like so. And we also have an XSPC backplate. Now the hardware that came with the XSPC backplate doesn't necessarily fit the water block from the Aqua Computer Company. So I've gone out to the local Ace and got some hardware that should work for us. So we're going to try to get this right on the first go. Go ahead and open up the vacuum seal here. Oh, that's such an attractive looking water block. With the R9 Fury X logo engraved, laser etch work on here. It's gonna be a nice block. So let's go ahead and just clean these pads off that are gonna make connection really quick with our alcohol. Let's confirm that the hardware we purchased from Ace works. All right, pay dirt. We can move on to placing this block on the card. All right, here we go. We want to make sure that everything is lining up when we place this down. Okay. Perfect fit. All right. So the trick that we have to overcome here is make sure to get both sets of directions lined up for the XSPC backplate, the front water block, and that we've got good pressure on all our components. So we'll take our XSPC backplate and lay it on top of the card and see where our holes line up, so we know what screws we can start to put in first. Looks like we can start with everything on the GPU except this top right bolt here. So we'll start over here, make that over here. And we don't want to crank it down. And then we're going to kind of do a star pattern here and leave this one open. And we'll start to squeeze the water block to the GPU. Okay. Our screws should be just tight enough to have everything snug down and making good contact, but not tight enough to damage any components. So let's move on to the next part, and that's getting the back plate on. So the stock hardware that came with the XSPC backplate is not going to match up with the Aqua Computer block. So what I ended up doing was getting some replacement 8mm screws from a local Ace Hardware, and it's going to look pretty nice. So let's go ahead and get that placed. Just as with the other side, we're going to have to apply some heat pads. We'll take off the protective plastic covers. And the directions show us placing it over the back of the GPU, over what looks like almost some diodes and a little controller chip. Okay, we're going to set the plate down and see how everything lines up. I'll place our hardware. Now this is the last screw on the CPU side of the block, so let's bring that in first. All right. That is a successful, solid install. Everything is making contact. All that's left is to place the 4 screws for the ports. All right, there it is. Give me a second to clean off the bench and we'll move over to Sis Prepping. All right, well, we got it all together. Look at this thing. It's so beastly. It's so gorgeous. It's so much copper. You know what? Let's see how much this thing actually weighs. Let's let it tear out here. $1,080 grams. That's like almost 2.5 pounds, 2.4 pounds. That's a heavy graphics card. So let's move on to Sis Prepping. So again, an explanation. Sis Prepping just basically makes sure that the inside of the block is clean, that any greases or residues left over from machining are cleaned out. And what I use is a little Sis Prep from Prima-Chill. Now I can put a link to this down in the description for you guys if you want to buy it yourself, but because we're just cleaning a block and not a whole entire loop, I'm only going to do about a half a gallon of solution. So in order to make this, we just get some distilled water. I got a half gallon here ready to go. And we take our Sis Prep solution, and this is only about a half a treatment left, so I'm just going to empty the whole bottle in. And then go ahead and set this on the side. So this here, this big blue tower in the background, is from my first water cooling loop ever. This is a Zalman's branded water tower, and I believe I had it on like my first 900 megahertz AMD. So it was a great cooling tower. There's a chance I might use this on the Windows 98 rig that you've seen me put videos out for before. But as of right now, I use it to just kind of Sis Prep parts for my cooling loop. So now that we've got our solution ready, our block has pass-through ports on it. So what we're going to do is close off one side and then put inlets and outlets on the other. So we'll take some plugs. Just make sure they're in good and tight. Okay. We'll flip the card back over. We'll put our spigots in. Excellent. Okay, now that we're all hooked up, all that's really left is to open the tower. Pour in our solution. And start the pump. Let's move the camera over and see if we can't get a better view. Okay, here we go. Let's hit the pump. Okay, so I'm going to leave it in this configuration running the Sis Prep solution for at least 10 or 12 hours. That way I know for sure that the chemicals in this prep solution have had a chance to make sure everything is clean. But anyways, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button, possibly subscribe, and have a great day.